Chapter 1: The Perfect Proposal. I thought I knew what heartbreak felt like until I found my fiancé at the Vatican kissing another woman just 12 hours after he'd proposed to me at the Trevi fountain. But that wasn't even the worst part. When I confronted him, he looked at me like I was a complete stranger and said the three words that shattered my world. "Who are you?" Let me take you back to yesterday morning when Rome still felt like the most romantic city on earth. The cobblestones beneath my feet seemed to sparkle as Marco led me through the winding streets, his hand warm and familiar in mine. We'd been together for 3 years, and this trip was supposed to be our celebration. He'd just gotten the promotion at his law firm, and I'd finally finished my master's degree in art history. Rome felt like the perfect backdrop for our future.
The morning sun cast everything in golden light as we made our way to the Trevi fountain. Marco was unusually quiet, his dark eyes holding secrets I assumed were about the surprise he'd been hinting at for weeks. My heart hammered against my ribs as we approached the fountain, the sound of cascading water mixing with the excited chatter of tourists in a dozen languages. "Close your eyes, Sophia," he whispered, his Italian accent making my name sound like music. I obeyed, feeling his hands guide me to what I assumed was the perfect spot. The scent of his cologne, sandalwood, and bergamot wrapped around me like a promise. When I opened my eyes, he was on one knee, a velvet box in his trembling hands. The diamond caught the morning light, throwing rainbows across his face. "Sophia Elena Martinez," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are my everything. Will you marry me?"
Through my tears, I saw our entire future spread out before us like a Renaissance painting. Sunday mornings in bed, children with his dark hair and my green eyes, growing old together in some sun-drenched Italian villa. "Yes," I whispered. Then louder, "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." The tourists around us erupted in applause. An elderly Italian woman wiped tears from her eyes and called out, "Brava!" Marco's hands shook as he slipped the ring onto my finger. A perfect fit, as if it had been made just for me. Chapter 2: The First Crack. The celebration dinner at that little trattoria in Trastevere should have been perfect. Candlelight flickered across Marco's face as he raised his glass of Chianti, his smile wide and genuine. "To us," he said, "and to forever." But something felt different. Maybe it was the way his phone kept buzzing against the checkered tablecloth, or how his eyes seemed to drift toward the restaurant's entrance every few minutes. When I tried to take a selfie of us with my new ring, he gently pushed my phone away. "Let's just be present," he murmured, but his own phone lit up again. I caught a glimpse of a name, Isabella, before he quickly flipped it face down. "Who's Isabella?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. The question hung between us like smoke from the flickering candle. Marco's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Just work stuff, amor. You know how the firm is, always calling." He reached across the table and took my hand, his thumb tracing circles over my new engagement ring. "Tonight is about us." I wanted to believe him. The rational part of my brain said it was normal. We'd both been glued to our phones for months, dealing with career pressures and family drama back home in Chicago. But something in his eyes, a flicker of something I couldn't name, made my stomach twist. After dinner, we walked hand in hand along the Tiber River. The city lights danced on the water like fallen stars, and Marco pulled me close, pressing his lips to my temple. "I love you, Sophia," he whispered, "more than all the stars in the Roman sky." But when we got back to our hotel room at the Hotel Artemide, he said he needed to step outside for a quick call. "The time difference," he explained, already reaching for his jacket. "I need to touch base with the office before it gets too late there." I nodded, exhaustion from the day's emotions pulling at my eyelids.
Don't be long, I murmured, already settling into the plush hotel bed. When I woke up 3 hours later, the space beside me was still empty and cold.
Chapter 3: The Disappearance. My heart hammered against my ribs as I dialed Marco's number for the 15th time. Straight to voicemail, again. The cheerful recording of his voice, "You've reached Marco Rossini, please leave a message," felt like a cruel joke. It was 3 a.m., and the hotel room felt cavernous without him. I'd already called the front desk twice, paced the marble floors until my feet ached, and stared out at the twinkling lights of Rome until my eyes burned. Where was he? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the call had run longer than expected. Maybe his phone had died. Maybe he'd gotten lost in the winding Roman streets. It wouldn't be the first time. But the engagement ring on my finger felt suddenly heavy, like it was weighing down my entire hand. By dawn, I'd made a decision that would have seemed crazy just 24 hours earlier. I opened the Find My iPhone app we'd shared since our second anniversary, a practical measure for a couple who traveled frequently. My hands shook as I entered his information. The little blue dot appeared on the map, stationary and unmistakable. Vatican City, specifically somewhere near St. Peter's Basilica. Relief flooded through me so intensely, I had to sit down on the edge of the bed. He was safe. But what was he doing at the Vatican at sunrise? Marco wasn't particularly religious. We'd planned to visit the Sistine Chapel later in the week as tourists, not pilgrims. I threw on yesterday's clothes and grabbed my purse, my mind racing through possibilities. Maybe he'd gotten caught up in some early morning tour. Maybe he'd wanted to surprise me with something special, some romantic gesture involving one of the world's most beautiful churches. The taxi ride through Rome's awakening streets felt surreal. Street sweepers pushed past cafes setting up their outdoor tables, and the morning light painted everything in soft pastels. I clutched my phone, watching that blue dot stay perfectly still near St. Peter's Square. As we approached Vatican City, my driver, a weathered man with kind eyes, glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "First time?" he asked in accented English. "No," I whispered, though it felt like a lie. This Rome, this desperate early morning chase through ancient streets, was nothing like the romantic city I'd fallen in love with yesterday. Chapter 4: The Other Woman. I saw them before they saw me. Marco stood in the shadow of Bernini's colonnade, his arms wrapped around a woman with cascading black hair and a red dress that hugged her curves like it had been painted on. She was beautiful in a way that made my chest tighten. Not just pretty, but stunning in that effortless Italian way that made American women like me feel clumsy and overdressed. But it was the way he held her that made my world tilt sideways. His hands cradled her face with a tenderness I recognized, a gentleness I thought was reserved only for me. And when he kissed her, it wasn't the desperate passion of an affair. It was the comfortable intimacy of people who'd been lovers for years. My legs nearly gave out. I gripped the nearest pillar, the cold stone the only thing keeping me upright, as I watched my fiancé, pour his soul into kissing another woman in the shadow of St. Peter's Basilica. They broke apart, and I could hear her laugh even from 50 feet away. It was musical, genuine, the kind of laugh that comes from deep happiness. She said something in rapid Italian that made Marco throw his head back in delight, and I saw him as I'd never seen him before, completely, utterly in love. Just not with me. I don't remember deciding to approach them. One moment I was frozen against the pillar, and the next I was walking across the square on shaking legs, my voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. "Marco!" He turned, and for a split second, his face was exactly what I expected. Guilt, panic, the look of a man caught in the worst possible moment. But then something strange happened. The recognition in his eyes faded, replaced by polite confusion. "Mi scusi," he said, tilting his head slightly. "Do I know you?" The woman beside him looked between us with growing alarm, her hand tightening on Marco's arm. She was even more beautiful up close, with doe eyes and olive skin that seemed to glow in the morning light. "It's me," I said, my voice cracking. "Sophia, your fiancé." I held up my left hand, the diamond catching the light. "You proposed to me yesterday at the Trevi fountain. You said—" "I think you have me confused with someone else," Marco interrupted. But there was something in his tone, something that didn't quite ring true. "I've never seen you before in my life."
Chapter 5. Shattered Reality. The woman in red stepped closer to Marco, her arm linking protectively through his. "Marco, what's happening?" she asked in English, though her accent was purely Italian. Her voice was soft, musical, and there was genuine concern in her dark eyes. "I don't know, Isabella," Marco replied, his gaze never leaving mine. "This woman seems to think she knows me." Isabella. The name from his phone last night hit me like a physical blow. This was Isabella. Not a colleague, not a work contact, but this stunning woman who was looking at me like I was completely insane. "You're lying," I whispered, but even as I said it, doubt crept in. The way he looked at me was so convincing, so genuinely confused. "Marco, please, we've been together for 3 years. We live together in Chicago. You work at Henderson and Associates. Your favorite movie is The Godfather, and you hate mushrooms on pizza, and you have a scar on your shoulder from when you fell off your bike when you were 7. "Stop," Isabella said firmly, stepping slightly in front of Marco. "You're frightening him, and you're clearly mistaken." But I saw it. Just for a moment, a flicker in Marco's eyes when I mentioned the scar. His hand moved unconsciously to his left shoulder, and I knew I'd hit something true. "Show her," I demanded, my voice rising. "Show her the scar, Marco. Tell her it's shaped like a crescent moon." The color drained from his face. Isabella looked between us, confusion and something else. Fear creeping into her expression. "How could you know that?" Marco whispered. And for the first time since I'd approached them, his voice held uncertainty. "Because I've kissed that scar 100 times, I said, tears streaming down my face now. "Because I love you. Because yesterday you told me you loved me too." Isabella's grip on Marco's arm tightened. "Marco," she said quietly, "what is she talking about?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Around us, the Vatican began to come alive, early morning tour groups gathering, vendors setting up their stalls, the ordinary business of a new day beginning while my world crumbled in the shadow of one of Christianity's holiest sites. Finally, Marco spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't remember you, I swear to God. I don't remember you. But," he looked down at Isabella, pain creasing his features, "but she knows things she shouldn't know." "No," Isabella breathed, and I heard her world beginning to crack too.
Chapter 6. The Photograph. "There has to be an explanation," Isabella said, but her voice was shaking now. She pulled out her phone with trembling fingers. "Marco, show her. Show her our photos." Marco hesitated, for a moment that felt like an eternity, then reached for his phone. His hands shook as he scrolled through his camera roll, and when he turned the screen toward me, I felt reality shift again. There they were, dozens of photos spanning what looked like months, maybe years. Marco and Isabella at the Colosseum, sharing gelato by the Pantheon, dancing at what looked like a wedding, kissing on a beach somewhere with crystal blue water. In every single photo, Marco looked at Isabella the way he looked at me for 3 years, like he was his entire world. But that was impossible. Yesterday morning, his phone had been full of pictures of us.
I'd seen them just last week when he was showing me photos from our weekend in Wisconsin. "This is impossible," I whispered, but even as I said it, I was pulling out my own phone, frantically scrolling to our photos. My hands froze. They were gone. All of them. Every picture of Marco and me together, from our first date at that little Thai restaurant in Lincoln Park to last week's hiking trip, had vanished. Instead, they were photos I didn't remember taking, pictures of me alone at places I supposedly visited, the Art Institute, Navy Pier, even what looked like our apartment but empty of any trace of Marco. It was like someone had erased him from my digital life and replaced him with nothing.
"I kept these," he explained to Isabella. "I was supposed to clean out her things, but I couldn't face it yet." The door opened with a soft click, and we stepped into what should have been an empty apartment. Instead, we found a fully furnished home that looked like someone had been living there recently. My coffee mug sat on the kitchen counter, still stained with this morning's espresso. A book I'd been reading lay open on the sofa, my bookmark exactly where I'd left it. Isabella gasped, "Marco, whose things are these?" But Marco wasn't listening. He was staring at the wall above the fireplace, his face white as marble. I followed his gaze and felt my knees buckle. There, in an ornate silver frame, was a photograph of an elderly Italian woman with kind eyes and silver hair. She was standing next to a young woman who looked exactly like me, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. "That's impossible," I breathed. "I've never met your grandmother." Marco walked slowly to the photograph, his hands trembling as he lifted it from the wall. "But you have," he whispered. "Look at the back." He turned it over, and there, in faded blue ink, was an inscription in Italian. "Sofia and Nonna Maria, Roma, 2023. 2 generations, 1 eternal love."
No, I muttered, frantically checking my social media, my cloud storage, anywhere our photos might be backed up. But it was all the same. 3 years of relationship history simply gone, replaced by the documentation of a single woman's life. Isabella was watching me with a mixture of pity and growing alarm. "Marco," she said quietly, "maybe we should call someone. She seems unwell." But Marco was staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. "What's your full name?" he asked suddenly. "Sofia Elena Martinez," I answered automatically. He went very still. "And your birthday?" "March 15th, 1995. "Marco, why are you—" "Show me your driver's license," he interrupted, his voice sharp now. I fumbled for my wallet, hands shaking as I pulled out my Illinois license. Marco took it from me, studied it intensely, then handed it to Isabella. Her face went white. "Marco," she whispered, "this says she lives at Via Veneto 47. The address meant nothing to me, but it clearly meant something to them. Marco's face had gone ashen. "That's impossible," he breathed. "That's my grandmother's old address. She died 6 months ago. The apartment's been empty since then." Chapter 7. The Grandmother's Secret. Marco stared at my driver's license like it was written in a language he couldn't understand. "This doesn't make sense," he kept repeating. "Nonna died in September. The landlord said no one had inquired about the apartment." "I need to see it," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "I need to see this apartment." Isabella looked like she wanted to object, but Marco was already nodding. "Yes," he said quietly, "we all need to see it." The taxi ride across Rome was suffocating.
Marco sat between Isabella and me, his leg bouncing with nervous energy, while Isabella kept glancing at me like I might disappear at any moment, while I stared out the window at a city that suddenly felt foreign and threatening. Via Veneto was a beautiful street, lined with elegant buildings and sidewalk cafes. The driver stopped in front of number 47, a cream-colored building with green shutters and flower boxes overflowing with red geraniums. "I've never been here before in my life," I whispered. But even as I said it, something felt familiar about the building's facade. Marco paid the driver with shaking hands. "The apartment is on the 3rd floor," he said. 3B. "My grandmother lived there for 40 years. We climbed the narrow stairs in silence. The building smelled like cooking herbs and old wood, homey and comforting in a way that made my chest ache. When we reached the 3rd floor, Marco pulled out a set of keys I'd never seen before.
Chapter 8. The Letters. I sank onto the sofa, my legs finally giving out. The book beside me was 100 Years of Solitude, a novel I'd never read, but somehow knew I'd been halfway through. The bookmark was a pressed flower, a red geranium that matched the ones in the window boxes outside. "This is impossible," Isabella whispered, but she was looking around the apartment with growing recognition. "Marco, I've been here before, last Christmas, when we came to visit your grandmother. But there was no Sophia. There was never any Sophia." Marco was moving through the apartment like a sleepwalker, touching objects with reverent fingers. In the bedroom, he stopped in front of a dresser covered with more photographs. Pictures of him and his grandmother, yes, but also pictures of me. With her, with him, with both of them together. Images of a life I couldn't remember living, but somehow felt in my bones. "Here," he said, his voice broken. He was holding a wooden box I recognized, even though I'd never seen it before. "Nona's letters. She wrote to everyone, family, friends, people she'd met on the street. She said writing kept the soul alive."
Inside the box were dozens of letters tied with ribbon, organized by date. Marco's hands shook as he found the most recent bundle and untied the silk cord. The top letter was dated just 2 weeks ago, addressed to someone named Father Giuseppe. Marco's voice cracked as he read aloud. "My dear friend, I am worried about Sophia. The headaches are getting worse, and she's starting to forget things. Small things at first, but yesterday she couldn't remember how to make coffee. The doctors say it's stress from her studies, but I fear something more serious. She speaks of Marco constantly, this young man she loves so desperately. But when I ask about him, she looks at me with such confusion. It breaks my heart to see her so lost between 2 worlds." Isabella was crying now, silent tears streaming down her beautiful face. "Marco, what does this mean?" But Marco was already reaching for another letter, this one dated a month ago. "The episodes are getting more frequent. Yesterday, Sophia spent the entire afternoon talking to someone who wasn't there, planning a wedding that exists only in her mind. She showed me a ring on her finger, a beautiful diamond that I cannot see, but she describes in perfect detail. I've made an appointment with Dr. Castellano. I pray he can help her distinguish between her dreams and reality. I looked down at my left hand. The engagement ring was still there, still sparkling in the afternoon light streaming through the window. But now, for the first time, I wondered, was it real?"
Chapter 9. The Medical Records. Dr. Castellano's office was tucked away on a quiet side street near the Pantheon, the kind of place you'd walk past 100 times without noticing. The nameplate by the door read Neurologia e Psychiatria, Neurology and Psychiatry. Marco had called ahead, his grandmother's letters clutched in his free hand. Isabella walked beside me, her earlier hostility replaced by something that looked like pity.
I hated that look, but I couldn't blame her for it. Nothing made sense anymore. The doctor was a kind man in his 60s, with gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He looked at me with recognition when we walked into his office. "Sophia," he said softly in accented English. "I wondered when you would come back." "I've never been here before," I said automatically, but the protest felt weak even to my own ears. Dr. Castellano pulled out a thick file folder. "You have been my patient for 6 months," he said gently, "since your accident." "What accident?" Marco and I asked at the same time. The doctor looked surprised. "The car accident in Chicago. You don't remember? You were walking to work, it was raining, and the driver didn't see you in the crosswalk. You suffered a severe traumatic brain injury. Your grandmother brought you here to Rome for treatment when the doctors in America said there was nothing more they could do." My hand went instinctively to my head, searching for evidence of trauma I couldn't remember. Nothing. But Dr. Castellano was opening the file, showing us brain scans that meant nothing to me, but made Marco suck in a sharp breath.
The injury affected your temporal lobe, the doctor continued, the area responsible for memory formation and emotional processing. In rare cases, trauma like this can cause what we call confabulation. The brain fills in gaps in memory with elaborate, detailed stories that feel completely real to the patient. "You're saying she made me up?" Marco asked, his voice hollow. "Not made up exactly. Sophia's brain took fragments, perhaps a photo she saw, a story someone told her, a dream, and wove them into a complete narrative. The man she describes loving so deeply, he may be based on you, someone she encountered during her time in Rome. Her subconscious mind created a relationship to fill the void left by her trauma." Isabella was reading over the medical notes. "It says here she was living with her grandmother, but she spoke of Chicago, of a life there." Another confabulation. In reality, Sophia has been in Rome for 6 months, living with Maria, receiving treatment. The life she remembers in Chicago, the career, the apartment, the relationship, these are all constructions of a brain trying to heal itself. I felt like I was drowning, but the photos on my phone are easily explained. Your phone was destroyed in the accident. Your grandmother bought you a new one. The photos you remember from your imagined life were never real." Dr. Castellano leaned forward, his voice infinitely gentle. "Sophia, your grandmother loved you very much. She brought you here hoping the change of environment would help your recovery. But she was very worried about the intensity of your delusions, particularly about this relationship with Marco."
Chapter 10. The Truth Revealed.
"Wait," Marco said suddenly, his voice sharp. "You said my grandmother brought Sophia here 6 months ago, but I've been with Isabella for over a year. We would have met Sophia." Dr. Castellano's expression shifted, becoming more cautious. "You are Marco Rosini?" "Yes." "And you live in Roma?" "My whole life. I work at my family's restaurant near Campo di Fiore." The doctor frowned, consulting his notes again. "That's unusual. Sophia spoke of you constantly, described you in perfect detail. Your work as a lawyer in Chicago, your relationship, even intimate details about your childhood." "I've never been to Chicago," Marco said firmly, "and I'm not a lawyer." Isabella was looking between all of us with growing confusion. "Dr. Castellano, how could Sophia know such specific things about Marco if they'd never met?" The doctor was quiet for a long moment, then reached for another section of Sophia's file. "There's something else," he said slowly. "Something your grandmother asked me not to tell you until you were stronger." My heart hammered against my ribs. What? Before the accident, you were engaged to a man named Marcus Rodriguez, a lawyer in Chicago. You were planning to honeymoon in Rome. The room spun around me. Marcus, not Marco. How had I gotten them confused? Your fiancé died in the same accident that injured you. You were walking together when the car hit. He died on impact. You survived, but with no memory of the trauma.
Isabella gasped. So her brain created Marco to replace Marcus? It's possible. The mind is remarkably creative in protecting itself from unbearable pain. Sophia may have unconsciously transferred her love for her deceased fiancé onto someone she encountered here in Rome. Someone who resembled him, perhaps, or reminded her of him in some way. Marco was staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. But why me specifically? We've never met. Dr. Castellano hesitated. Actually, you have. Your grandmother mentioned it in her last visit. Apparently, Sophia had become fascinated with a young man she'd seen at a restaurant near her apartment. She would sit at the cafe across the street and watch him work, sometimes for hours. Your grandmother was concerned it was becoming an unhealthy obsession. The truth hit me like a physical blow. I had been stalking Marco, essentially, creating an entire relationship in my mind based on watching him from afar, filling in details from my life with Marcus, the man I'd actually loved and lost. The proposal at the Trevi fountain. I whispered, "Did that really happen?" "You were there yesterday morning, yes, alone. The proprietor of the nearby cafe called your grandmother when you began talking to yourself, showing your ring to tourists, acting as though someone was proposing to you." I looked down at my left hand. The engagement ring was still there, still beautiful. "Is this real?" Dr. Castellano nodded sadly. "It was Marcus's ring. Your grandmother saved it from your belongings after the accident."
Chapter 11. The Confrontation. The silence in Dr. Castellano's office was deafening. I stared at the engagement ring on my finger, Marcus's ring, and felt the last pieces of my constructed reality crumble away. 3 years of memories that never happened. A love that was real, but with a dead man whose name I'd somehow transferred to a living stranger. Marco stood abruptly. "I need air," he said, his voice strained. This is too much." Isabella rose with him, her hand on his arm. "Marco, are you okay?" But he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me, with an expression that made my chest ache. Pity, mixed with something that might have been fear. "Sophia," he said quietly, "I'm sorry for what happened to you. I'm sorry about Marcus. But you have to understand, this has to stop." "I know," I whispered, and for the first time in months, I meant it. The fog that had been clouding my mind was lifting, and with painful clarity, I could see what I'd done. "I know it's not real." Marco continued, his voice gaining strength. "You've been watching me for months, following me, learning my routines. Do you understand how frightening that is?" Isabella's grip on his arm tightened. "Should we call the police?" "No," Dr. Castellano interjected quickly. "Sophia is not dangerous. She's been dealing with severe psychological trauma. What she needs is continued treatment, not criminal charges." But Marco was shaking his head. "How do I know she won't do this again? How do I know she won't show up at my restaurant tomorrow or follow Isabella and me home?"
The fear in his voice cut through me like a blade. This beautiful, kind man, the man I'd built a fantasy life around, was afraid of me. The woman who'd loved him so completely in her delusions had become his stalker in reality. "I'll leave Rome," I said suddenly. The words surprised even me, but as soon as I spoke them, I knew they were right. "I'll go back to Chicago. Dr. Castellano, can you help me arrange that?" "Sophia, you're not ready for such a big transition. Your treatment..." "My treatment can continue in Chicago.
where it should have continued in the first place. I looked at Marco and Isabella, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. They were beautiful together, clearly in love, and I had been the shadow haunting their happiness. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm so sorry for what I put you through." Marco's expression softened slightly. "I know you didn't mean to. But, Sophia, promise me you'll get help. Real help." "I promise." Isabella spoke for the first time in several minutes. "Your grandmother," she said quietly. "She loved you very much. She only wanted you to get better." Fresh tears spilled down my cheeks. Nana Maria, who had taken in a broken American girl and tried to heal her with love and patience, who had died 6 months ago while I was lost in my delusions, probably wondering if I'd ever come back to reality. "She's buried here in Rome," Dr. Castellano said gently. "Perhaps before you leave, you might want to visit her grave?" I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat.
Chapter 12. Saying Goodbye. Campo Verano Cemetery was beautiful in the golden hour before sunset, ancient cypress trees casting long shadows across weathered marble headstones. I walked alone among the graves, carrying a bouquet of red geraniums, the same flowers that had decorated the window boxes at Nona Maria's apartment. I found her grave easily, as if some part of me had always known where she rested. The headstone was simple: Maria Rossini, 1943 to 2024. Beloved grandmother and friend. Someone had left fresh flowers, white roses that I suspected came from Marco. "I'm sorry, Nona," I whispered, kneeling beside the grave. "I'm sorry I wasn't really here when you died. I'm sorry I was lost in my own world when you needed me to be present in yours." The cemetery was quiet, except for the distant sounds of Roman traffic and the soft cooing of doves in the trees. I closed my eyes and tried to remember her, really remember her, not the confused fragments my damaged brain had constructed, but the real woman who had taken me in and loved me. Slowly, like photographs developing in darkroom solution, real memories began to surface. Nona Maria teaching me to make proper espresso in her tiny kitchen, her patient smile when I forgot Italian words, the way she'd held me when I woke from nightmares about the accident, even though I couldn't remember what I was dreaming about. She talked about you constantly. I turned to find Marco standing a few feet away, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He looked different somehow. Older, sadder. "You came," I said, surprised. "I come every Sunday." She was special. He moved closer, kneeling beside me at the grave. "She used to worry about you so much. She'd come to the restaurant sometimes, asking if I'd noticed you watching from across the street. She was afraid you were going to hurt yourself." "Were you afraid of me?" Marco considered this. "At first, yes. But Nona explained about your accident, about what you'd lost. I felt sorry for you more than anything."
We sat in comfortable silence for a while, two strangers united by the love of a woman who had tried to save us both in her own way. "I'm flying back to Chicago tomorrow," I said finally. "Dr. Castellano helped me arrange proper treatment there. I won't be coming back to Rome." Marco nodded. "That's probably for the best." "I want you to know," I said, my voice steady for the first time in months, "that in my mind, the love I felt for you was real. Even if you were never really mine, even if it was all a construction of trauma and grief, the love itself was real." "I know," Marco said quietly. "And I'm sorry you lost Marcus.
I'm sorry your brain had to create me to cope with that loss. I stood, brushing dirt from my knees. Take care of Isabella. She loves you very much. I will. As I walked away, I felt lighter somehow, as if laying the geraniums on Nonna Maria's grave had also allowed me to lay down the weight of my delusions. Rome stretched out below me in all its eternal glory, a city of love and loss, of ancient stones and modern heartbreak. I didn't look back. Back in my hotel room, I opened my laptop and began typing an email to my sister in Chicago, telling her I was coming home. Then I opened a new document and started writing. Not the fantasy love story my broken brain had constructed, but the real story of a woman learning to live with loss, to distinguish between memory and dream, between love and obsession. If you've ever struggled with trauma, with the way our minds protect us by creating stories we need to believe, please know you're not alone. Sometimes healing means letting go of the beautiful lies we tell ourselves and embracing the difficult truth of what really happened. Share your own story in the comments below if you feel comfortable. Sometimes connection is the first step toward recovery. Like this video if it moved you, and subscribe for more stories about love, loss, and the complicated ways we heal. Until next time, remember that even our broken hearts can learn to beat again.